They say the Romans conquered Gaul with swords and shields, but the true conquest came after the blood dried, when names were changed, temples razed, and memories rewritten. What happens when the victors not only win the war, but the narrative? This is not just the story of battles, it's the story of erasure. The Celts of Gaul were fierce, free, and full of spirit, yet today they survive only in fragments. Join us as we uncover the silent invasion that followed Caesar's march, the transformation of a people, the loss of identity, and the echo of resistance buried beneath Roman stone. Before the eagle banners marched across the hills, before Caesar carved Gaul into his legacy, there was a land alive with thunderous drums, sacred groves, and the fierce pride of a free people. The Gauls, diverse, untamed, and deeply spiritual, were no scattered barbarians. They were a vibrant tapestry of tribes united by belief, bound by honor, and ruled not by emperors, but by elders, druids, and warrior kings. They worshipped in the heart of nature. Their temples were ancient oaks, their altars formed from stone, their gods born from wind, earth, and fire. In every forest a spirit watched, in every river a story flowed. These people lived in rhythm with the land, not above it but within it. To them, the world was sacred. Every blade of grass held memory. Every mountain whispered myth. Their society was complex, tribal, yet structured, with councils of chieftains, warrior classes, and the ever-present Druids who wielded more power than kings. The Druids were memory keepers, lawgivers, and spiritual guides. They passed wisdom through song, through firelit stories, through blood oaths, whispered in the dark. And when the Romans first gazed across the Rhine or the Pyrenees, what they saw was not disorder. It was a mystery they could not control. The Gauls wore fierce mustaches, painted their bodies for battle, and rushed into war with the roar of wolves. But their greatest strength wasn't their swords, it was their soul. A soul that Rome would soon try to rewrite, not with steel, but with silence. The year was 58 BCE. The Roman Republic was teetering on the edge of transformation, and Julius Caesar, governor, general, and political opportunist, sought glory not in Rome but across the wild lands of Gaul. What began as a campaign against migrating tribes soon became something far greater, a personal conquest, a rewriting of a continent, a blood-soaked rebranding of history. To Caesar, Gaul was not just a land, it was a stage, and his audience, the Roman Senate, the people, the future. Through his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, he crafted not just a record of war, but a mythos of civilization conquering savagery, of order imposing itself upon chaos. But behind those polished Latin sentences was something darker. Villages burned, fields salted, men crucified, women and children sold like livestock. To the world, he was a bringer of Roman peace. To the Gauls, he was the herald of annihilation. And yet the Gauls resisted, not just with spears, but with fire in their hearts. Tribe after tribe rose against him, fierce and unrelenting. The fiercest among them all was Vercingetorix, a young noble of the Arverni, who united the tribes in a final stand against Rome. He understood something Caesar didn't, that Gaul was not merely a place to be won, it was a spirit that refused to kneel. The two would meet at Alesia, one of history's most brutal and brilliant sieges. Trapped within the fortified hilltop city, Vercingetorix and his warriors watched as Caesar built not one, but two walls. One to keep the Gauls in, another to keep reinforcements out. It was a prison and a death trap, a masterpiece of Roman engineering fueled by arrogance and urgency. For weeks, starvation gnawed at the defenders. Children were driven out of the city, only to die between the lines. When Gallic reinforcements finally arrived, the land erupted in chaos. Arrows screamed, cavalry clashed, the earth ran red. But Caesar, relentless, unshaken, held the line. Vercingetorix, proud but pragmatic, surrendered not out of fear, but to spare his people further destruction. He rode from the gates and laid down his weapons at Caesar's feet. But this wasn't a moment of mercy, it was spectacle. The young Gallic leader would be paraded through Rome in chains, displayed like a beast, and later strangled in a dungeon. His death a footnote in Caesar's rise to power. Alesia was more than a battle. It was the breaking point. After it, Gaul would never be the same. The lands were subdued, the resistance shattered. But something even more sinister had begun. The rewriting of a people's memory, not through fire this time, but ink. With the Gauls militarily subdued, the Romans didn't rest. They rebuilt. Not in honor of those they had conquered, but in the image of their own empire. Cities rose where sacred groves had once stood. Amphitheaters replaced tribal gathering circles, and Roman baths steamed where once only rivers had witnessed sacred rites. This was not simply rebuilding, it was reprogramming. The process was subtle but relentless. Latin became the language of law, commerce, and power. Gallic tongues were left to fade in the mouths of children, discouraged, mocked, or banned outright. Tribal names were Romanized, twisted into new forms until their origins became unrecognizable. The Arverni, the Aedui, the Treveri, once sovereign peoples, were now provinces, census entries, abstractions on imperial scrolls. Religion, too, was transformed. The Druids, once feared and revered, keepers of history and fate, were hunted, outlawed, and eventually silenced. Their sacred oak groves were burned, their knowledge dismissed as superstition or magic. The gods of the forest, of thunder, of stone and water, were either forgotten or forcibly merged with Roman deities. Taurinus with Jupiter, Belenus with Apollo, Epona with Diana, the divine was co-opted, the spiritual erased. Even architecture became a weapon of memory. Roman temples were built on top of Druidic sites, their marble columns casting long shadows over erased traditions. Every brick laid was a declaration. Rome is here now. Rome has always been here. The cultural assimilation wasn't just forced, it was seductive. Roman roads brought trade, aqueducts brought water. Roman citizenship offered protection and privilege. To many Gallic elites, cooperation was survival. Romanization became a ladder, a promise of upward mobility. Slowly, and then all at once, the heart of Gaul began to beat in Latin. But this transformation came at a cost. Identity. The Gauls who once gathered in warrior councils and sang the names of their ancestors now walked in togas, now prayed at Roman altars, now told their children stories written by foreign pens. The myths, the songs, the whispered truths, they faded, not by fire but by forgetting. This was Rome's greatest conquest, not of land, but of legacy. The Gauls were not simply conquered, they were redrawn. Their history was overwritten, their gods rebranded, their culture embalmed in Roman stone. They had become Gallo-Romans, a people without a past of their own, only a future approved by Caesar. Yet beneath the mosaics and the marble, something still stirred. Echoes in the hills, names that refused to vanish, festivals held in secret under the stars. Rome could silence the Druids, but it could not silence the land. Not forever. History, they say, is written by the victors. But what they don't say, what they never say, is that it's also rewritten by them. Retold, reshaped, and repurposed until the truth becomes unrecognizable. And so it was with Gaul. The Romans didn't just conquer the Celtic tribes, they claimed the right to define them. In Caesar's own words, the Gauls were brave but primitive, noble yet backward, strong yet in desperate need of Roman guidance. And because his voice survived, etched into marble, copied by scribes, canonized by scholars, that version became the only version. The Gauls, in their own tongue, never had a chance to respond. The Druids, the poets, the oral historians, they were silenced before they could set their truths to parchment. Their stories, their triumphs, their sorrows, passed through generations by voice and memory, were lost, like smoke in the wind. What we know today comes not from those who lived the story, but from those who ended it. Roman chroniclers cast the Celts as barbarians, wild, naked, irrational. Their rich spiritual systems were labeled pagan nonsense, their art primitive, their resistance futile. Even their greatest hero, Vercingetorix, was reduced to a cautionary tale, paraded in chains, then erased. To be remembered by Rome was not an honor, it was a sentence. The process was surgical. Gaul became Gallia, the tribes became provinces. The lands were mapped, renamed, divided. The Celtic language was pushed to the fringes, and with it the thoughts, values, and cosmology of an entire people. Once these hills echoed with songs of ancestry, with sacred chants beneath moonlight. Now they echoed with Latin commands and Roman law. And yet, even within this manipulation, traces of the original voices linger. In Roman texts, if you read between the lines, if you listen to what's not being said, you'll hear them. The rage in Caesar's descriptions, the fear cloaked in superiority, the awe hidden behind Roman bravado. He feared them, these Gauls. He respected them, even as he dismantled them. But his version endured. For centuries, historians repeated his lines, textbooks regurgitated his view, the Celts became side notes in their own story, the Gauls became relics, forgotten but for their conquerors' words. This is the tragedy of history, not just the loss of life, but the loss of voice. Rome's greatest monument wasn't its roads or aqueducts, it was its control over memory. And in erasing the story of Gaul, it didn't just erase a people, it erased an entire worldview. Yet the stones remember, the rivers remember, and perhaps, through us, so will the world. Rome may have paved the roads of Gaul and built cities of marble, yet beneath those stones lies a story that refuses to be buried. The Celts were not simply conquered, they were rewritten, their history reshaped by those who claimed victory. But history is never just about who wins the war. It is about who controls the story afterward. For centuries, the Gauls lived only in the echoes of Roman scrolls, their voices muted, their culture dismissed as barbarism. Yet, if you listen closely, you'll hear their pulse beneath the surface, in the festivals still celebrated in Brittany, in the languages that survived on the edges, in the ancient legends whispered around fire. The Roman conquest was not the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the Celts fought to keep their soul alive amidst the tide of empire. They adapted, resisted, and endured in ways history rarely records. Today, the legacy of Gaul is not just in ruins and relics, it is alive in the very fabric of modern Europe. The stories once silenced are now being rediscovered, reclaimed, and retold. The Celts may have been rewritten by history, but they are not forgotten. So we ask you, what parts of history have been rewritten? Whose voices have been lost or silenced? And what can we do to listen more carefully, to remember more fully? Because history is more than just facts on a page, it is the lifeblood of identity, a mirror held up to the past that shapes our future. If this story stirred something in you, like this video, subscribe to Whispering Myths, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The past waits, not to be forgotten, but to be remembered. If you hear the voices of the forgotten in this tale, like this video, subscribe to Whispering Myths, and share which piece of Celtic Gaul still lives in your imagination. Because some conquests fade, but stories endure.